Brilliant. So we'll get started. My name is Fiona Clapperton and I am the Education and Engagement Manager here at the Harley Gallery. But I'm also a historian and I have a PhD in early 20th century history, focusing on social relations and networks within country estate communities. And I'm going to talk to you today about Disraeli and his relationship with Welbeck, and in particular the sons of the 4th Duke of Portland. But before we get on to that, for those of you who've not visited the Harley Gallery before or don't know where we're based on the Welbeck estate in Nottinghamshire. And we have 2 galleries here that are free to enter. The Harley Gallery, which is a contemporary and modern space showing art exhibitions, and the Portland Collection Museum, which houses a collection of fine and decorative art belonging to the Dukes of Portland and their ancestors. So we will get cracking. So this was a talk that I really wanted to write after coming across some letters exchanged between Benjamin Disraeli and the 5th Duke of Portland. And it really sparked my interest. And I really wondered what these letters were hinting at was that Disraeli felt a debt of gratitude towards the Portland family. So I did a little bit of digging, and the research that I did has led to this talk today. So for those of you who are aware of the history of Benjamin Disraeli, you might already know that he is the most quoted British Prime Minister in history. So there are more quotes attributed to Disraeli than Winston Churchill even. One of his most telling quotes, I think, is as follows: "The secret of success in life is for a man to be ready for his opportunity." And I'm going to suggest today that Disraeli's opportunity came when he met and befriended the Portland family. And this talk will chart the relationship between Benjamin Disraeli and, as I mentioned, the sons of the 4th Duke of Portland in particular. And it really argues that Disraeli's later success was due to this support, and that this was something that Disraeli recognised and never forgot. So to measure the assistance given to Disraeli by the Portland family, I thought we'd start off by looking at Disraeli's early career and to the debts alluded to in the title of this talk. So Disraeli grew up in a middle-class Jewish family. He was baptised into the Church of England as a child. And his father was very anti-Whig. So he brought Benjamin Disraeli up with a Tory understanding of British history. And this glamorised kind of the prestige and power of Britain and kind of romanticised its past. After deciding to leave school early, Disraeli began working as an assistant at a law firm. However, as one historian noted, he was much more interested in clothes than contracts. It was around this time that he fell in with the trend amongst young men of dandyism, turning up at the office in ever more spectacular and expensive outfits. This was the era of the Grand Tour, when well-off young men travelled through Europe to learn more about histories and cultures of the continent, not that dissimilar to modern-day gap years. So Disraeli decided to take a break from law and to emulate the example of the young men he looked up to and the young men that he was trying to fit in with by buying these expensive clothes. And he set off on his own grand tour. And while he was travelling, he had a change of heart about his career in law. He knew it would not bring him the level of riches and fame that he desired. And Disraeli would later claim that money is power. So upon his return, he decided to quit his job and begin speculating on the stock market instead. Now, unfortunately, there was a problem with this plan. Disraeli had no capital of his own with which to invest, and as a minor under the age of 21, he was not legally competent to borrow money or even trade in shares. So Disraeli, persuaded his friends and family to let him invest considerable sums of money on their behalf. He decided to speculate on mining in South America, which is proving to be very popular at that time. However, the consequences were disastrous. The value of the mining stock plummeted, and Disraeli and his friends all lost money. Disraeli needed to find a new career and make some of that money back. So he turned to a family friend with whom he'd lost money on the stock market and asked him to help set up a political newspaper. While Disraeli put a small amount of his own capital into the scheme, his friends were the ones who chiefly financed it. Disraeli, with no experience in this area, reinvented himself and promised to contribute his share by finding editorial staff and writers and by producing articles himself. They called their newspaper The Representative, and it was while he was trying to recruit staff for this newspaper that Disraeli met Sir Walter Scott. He had hoped to encourage Scott's son-in-law to join his team, which would have been a great boon for their newspaper. However, Scott was unimpressed, and after a meeting with him, referred to Disraeli as a young coxcomb. Now, Disraeli wanted his newspaper to be a success in its own right, but by writing favourable articles about mining in South America, Disraeli hoped his newspaper would influence the stock market and encourage those share prices to rise. He still had not given up on his dream of making a fortune on the stock exchange. But alas, in December 1825, the South American mining stock finally collapsed entirely. The newspaper also flopped and closed after only a few months in business. This left Disraeli's friend with startup costs of £26,000 and no way to recoup them. And this man ended up selling his 2 London homes to cover the costs. Disraeli himself was left with a combined debt of around £2,500, the equivalent of £140,000 today. And if he'd not been under the legal age of responsibility, he would no doubt have faced debtor's prison. At this point, Disraeli decided to reinvent himself once more. He knew he was good at writing from his work on the newspaper, and so as a stopgap, he decided to try his hand at writing novels as a way to make some money and also to raise his profile. His first novel, Vivian Grey, was based on his experiences with the stock market and journalism. And in it, Disraeli portrayed the main character of Grey, based on himself, as a brave and blameless survivor of events beyond his control. And now Vivian Grey eventually decides that true fame and success can be found through politics. As Disraeli himself noted, in Vivian Grey, I have portrayed my active and real ambition. However, it holds little clues to Disraeli's stance on political issues. Later in life, when he looked back on his early novels, Disraeli would reflect that books written by young men can be at best the results of imagination, and of such circumstance, exaggeration is a necessary consequence. This first novel earned him £700, which was a respectable figure, and did go some way towards achieving Disraeli's aims of making money and raising his profile. But unfortunately, this amount was not large enough to clear his mounting debts. In 1831, Disraeli reinvented himself once more. He finally felt able to try his hand at politics, the ambition he'd set out in Vivian Grey. He wrote to his father to declare that, if the Reform Bill passes, I intend to offer myself for the seat at Wickham. The Reform Bill, which did pass, introduced major changes to the electoral system of England and Wales, meaning that there was more opportunity for newcomers to enter politics. But this was still a bold move for Disraeli. He didn't belong to a party, he had no political allies, and he was still in debt. But he had ambition, and in true Disraeli tradition, he approached his friends to help finance his campaign. The real challenge was in deciding which party to align with. He was anti-Whig from his upbringing, but the Tories were facing difficulties with infighting. Some things are never new. Their leader, Robert Peel, didn't enjoy the entire party's support due to some of his reformist tendencies. So Disraeli decided to run as an independent, stating, As for parties, I am for myself. He stood 3 times as an independent candidate for Wickham between 1832 and 1834, but lost each time. The local press pointed out then that other than a clutch of novels and striking good looks, Disraeli had no qualifications or accomplishments to merit election. Finally, he decided to put aside his qualms and turn to the Tories, and it was on his 5th attempt that he finally entered Parliament as a Tory MP, not for Wickham, but for Maidstone. Disraeli was still sceptical of the Tories' future, particularly under the leadership of Prime Minister Robert Peel, whose policies he did not agree with. And this was how he befriended the Portland family. Lord George Bentinck, son of the 4th Duke of Portland, was a Conservative MP, though he was better known for his interest in horse racing than his politicking. He'd made a name for himself by exposing a racing scandal in 1844 when a 4-year-old horse won a 3-year-old's race. In relation to politics, he himself stated, "On general subjects, I am much too ill-informed, and on a multitude of questions, quite entirely ignorant." However, like Disraeli, he disagreed with Peel's leadership of both the Conservatives and the country, and what he lacked in political experience, he made up for in his credentials. He was rich, the son of a duke, the grandson of one prime minister, and the nephew of another. Disraeli and Bentinck quickly became allies. Both were driven by their determination to bring down Peel. In this cause, both proved to be very effective. Lord George refused to eat before giving his speeches. Hungry and angry, he proved hard to beat. He had a head for statistics, gained in a lifetime of betting on horses, which was a powerful weapon during debates. Meanwhile, Disraeli, with his flair for persuasive language, became seen as the ablest mouthpiece of the Tory opposition to Peel. Together, the two managed their aim, and Peel had to step down as leader in 1846. But this caused a split in the Conservative Party. Those who had stood against Peel called themselves the Protectionists, and Lord George became their leader. When Parliament returned after the collapse of Peel's government in January 1847, Disraeli took a seat on the Conservative benches for the first time alongside Lord George Bentinck. He had established himself as someone who could not be ignored, but he didn't yet have the credentials to lead the Tories. Disraeli didn't seem to be bothered by this. He accepted Lord George's leadership and supported him loyally. However, he may have had ulterior motives. So Disraeli wished to increase his political standing. To do so, he needed to make 2 changes. Firstly, he wanted to stand for a safer political seat. He had family ties to Buckinghamshire, and this was the county where he'd first tried to enter Parliament as a representative for Wickham. Secondly, he decided he needed a country estate because this would help Tory squires and landowners accept him. However, despite marrying a rich widow in 1839, Disraeli's debts had continued to grow, and he now owed around £15,000. Therefore, when he saw that the Buckinghamshire estate of Hughenden was being sold for just under £35,000, he turned to Lord George Bentinck. While the exact details of the loan have not been found, the memoirs of the 6th Duke of Portland, writing much later in 1937, give us a potential version of events. He wrote that the following story was told to me by Mr. Henry Chaplin, afterwards Viscount Chaplin, who knew Disraeli and Lord Henry Bentinck particularly well. He writes, during the debates on the free trade policy introduced by Sir Robert Peel and carried into effect in 1846, Lord George, the leader of the Protectionist Party, came home to Welbeck. As he appeared to be in low spirits, his brother Henry, who then was MP for North Notts, said to him, "What is the matter, George? You seem out of sorts." George replied, "Oh, it is nothing much. I am only annoyed at the stupidity and narrow-mindedness of our friends in the House of Commons, for I have found an ideal leader for the Protectionist Party in Benjamin Disraeli. But they will not listen to my advice because they say he is not a landed proprietor." "What of that, George?" said Henry. "Let us make him one." George replied, "Don't talk nonsense. How can we make him a landed proprietor?" Henry answered, "You and I may not be able to, but father could. I have been with him this morning and he seems to be in a very good humour, so let's go and talk to him about it." Now, evidently, their mission met with success, for soon afterwards, the Duke advanced a sufficient sum of money to buy Hughenden, and after this, Disraeli had the necessary qualification for leadership as a landed proprietor. So this is the story that's told to us by the 6th Duke of Portland. Whether or not this version of events is strictly true, letters do show that Lord George intended to lend Disraeli around £25,000 to help him buy the property. So let's pop this cost into context. So in 2017, this amount was worth approximately £2,004,652.50. And in 1850, you could buy the following with £25,000. You could buy 1,666 horses. You could buy 4,681 cows, or you could afford 125,000 days of labour from skilled workers. Unfortunately, tragedy struck before the arrangement was completed. Only 2 weeks after Disraeli bought Hughenden, Lord George Bentinck suddenly died. On the 21st of September 1848, after spending the morning at Welbeck Abbey, writing a letter to Disraeli coincidentally, Lord George decided to walk 6 miles to Thoresby. On the way, he collapsed. He was only 46. Disraeli declared that the death was the greatest loss I have ever experienced. He was panicked because he had relied on Lord George's money to purchase Hughenden. But after his death, there was no guarantee that his family, and in particular his brothers, Lord Titchfield, the future 5th Duke, Lord Henry, and their father, the 4th Duke of Portland, would honour the loan. Disraeli relied on his penmanship skills once again and wrote a calculated letter of condolence to Lord Henry, stating, "It seems to me that the pulse of the nation beats lower after this. All is unutterable woe." And I only write this because when the occasion is fitting, there are reasons that make it necessary that I should see you. Lord Henry asked Disraeli to meet him less than a month after his brother's death on the 18th of October. We don't know exactly what was agreed, but the meeting was a triumph for Disraeli. In a letter to his wife, Disraeli claimed that he had made it clear to Lord Henry that if he was asked to pay back the loan, he would have to sell Hughenden and resign his Buckinghamshire seat. This he declared to be utterly impossible. Then I went on to the state of my affairs, observing that it would be no object to them, the Portland family, and no pleasure to me, unless I played the high game in public life, and that I could not do that without being on a rock, or, in other words, an estate. Disraeli writes that Lord Henry entreated me not to mention this to the Duke, or to anyone but himself, and that the moment affairs were settled, he himself would see what he could do about my private affairs, that he was resolved that I should play the great game, and that I must trust him. He was with me for 4 hours, and appears even more devoted than Lord G. With his affairs now in order, and Lord George Bentinck deceased, Disraeli became leader of the protectionist wing of the Tory party in 1849. He was well aware of the debt he now owed to the Bentinks, and Disraeli sought to show his gratitude. Though he was not in a position to pay off his debt, he wrote a political biography of Lord George Bentinck, which he published in 1851. The historians Douglas Hurd and Edward Young noted that this book was an attempt to repay the debt in the only coin in which he was rich. In the book, he heaped praise on Lord George, picking out, in particular, his aptitude for hard work and his stance against Peel. And the book was a surprising commercial success, going through 4 editions in 6 months. In his memoirs, the 6th Duke of Portland, a distant relative of Lord George, recalled that in 1880, Disraeli very kindly gave me a copy of his book, Lord George Bentinck, a political biography, in which he wrote, "The Duke of Portland from his friend. It is still one of my most cherished possessions. In 1857, Lord George's eldest brother, who had recently become the 5th Duke of Portland, finally called time on the loan. By this time, Disraeli had accrued debts of around £10,000 on the estate. However, he had found other political sponsors, having risen quickly through the Tory party's ranks. And by this time, he had already served as Chancellor of the Exchequer once, an interesting role given his financial history, and one that he would hold again the following year. A series of letters exchanged between the 5th Duke and Disraeli demonstrate the depth of Disraeli's gratitude, and they once again showcase his literary skills. And these are the letters that I came across, which sparked my imagination and led me to research for this talk. Disraeli wrote, "I am aware of the personal interposition which your Grace made on my behalf at the time of the catastrophe," and by this he means the death of Lord George. "It must have cost you great pain and solicitude, and it merited and obtained my gratitude. I am not insensible of the forbearance which I have experienced from your Grace. Of course, kind and considerate conduct, which has ranged over so long a period, whatever the motive, ought not to be disregarded by the recipient, and I wish to offer you my thanks in terms not conventional, but cordial." He went on to explain, "The accounts of the estate have been regularly kept, and it appears by the balance, which has been recently studied, that the pecuniary loss of the project to myself has been a little short of £10,000. In his response, the 5th Duke wrote graciously that Disraeli did not need to justify himself. "I hasten to acknowledge receipt this afternoon of your letter of yesterday's date, and to express my very great regrets that you should have felt it in the slightest degree called for." Yet, Disraeli still wanted to show his gratitude to the Bentinck family for all they had given him in his earlier years. He wrote again to inform the 5th Duke of an honour Queen Victoria would like to bestow on him. Whether Disraeli had suggested this idea to Queen Victoria, or whether he had merely wanted to be the person to share the news to the Duke, we will never know. He wrote, "My Lord Duke, the Queen has lately, on more than one occasion, expressed to me Her Majesty's admiration of the quality of spirit your Grace characterised, not only by a large generosity, but by an original and independent love. The Queen was heard to express Her Majesty's regret that it seemed not in her power to signify Her Majesty's appreciation of these rare qualities, and she remarked to me on Sunday that it would please Her Majesty if your Grace would accept the Order of the Garter. I have therefore to assure your Grace that I do not make this communication as a minister, but as a private individual, honoured in that respect by Her Majesty's confidence. No political tie or sentiment are admitted into this transaction, and I hope I may presume to add that I feel favoured by being the instrument of Her Majesty's favour." Conveying so distinguished a mark of esteem by our sovereign to the head of a great house, for which I must ever feel respect and affection. I have the honour to remain your Grace's faithful servant. However, the 5th Duke of Portland was a private individual, and he disliked the formalities of court life. He declined the offer of being admitted to the Order of the Garter. Disraeli had more luck, demonstrating his gratitude to the 5th Duke's heir, the 6th Duke of Portland, a distant cousin who inherited the title in 1879. By this time, Disraeli had become leader of the Conservative Party, was Prime Minister, and had been given the title of the Earl of Beaconsfield. He would never have achieved these things without the backing and the support of the Portland family, and in particular Lord George and his brothers, who had allowed him to play the great game. This was clearly at the forefront of Disraeli's mind. In his memoirs, the 6th Duke reflected, "In December 1879, without my stepmother's knowledge, it was suggested that to the Prime Minister, Lord Beaconsfield, that Queen Victoria might be inclined to recognise her position by conferring a title upon her. Within a fortnight of my succession to the dukedom, Lord Beaconsfield, Disraeli, invited me to visit him at Hughenden. I well remember how nervous I felt at the prospect. After arriving at Hughenden, Lord Beaconsfield, Monty Corey and I dined together. I do not think Lord Beaconsfield talked much during dinner, But when it was over, he said to me, "And now, my young friend, and I trust you will allow me to call you so, and that you will look upon me as a friend too, I should like to explain why I wish to make your acquaintance. Well," he continued, "I am a man of many faults and failures like everyone else, but perhaps I have one redeeming quality. I mean that the feeling of gratitude is very strong within me, and I believe I owe any success that might have been mine in my long life, mainly to two people. One of these was, of course, my dear wife, and the other was your relative, Lord George Bentinck. When I was a young and struggling young man, Lord George held forth the hand of friendship to me, and we became not only political allies, but very sincere friends. I had a great respect for him and his brother, and so I shall only be too glad to be of some service to you. Now I hope you understand why I was anxious to make your acquaintance, and I trust that I may be able to pay back a small part of the debt which I owe to the Bentinck family." Some historians have gone even further when describing Disraeli's behaviour that evening, and according to Douglas Hurd and Edward Young, Disraeli told the 6th Duke of Portland that he decided to recommend a peerage for his stepmother, Mrs. Cavendish Bentinck, adding by way of explanation, "I come from a race which never forgives an injury, nor forgets a benefit." On March the 12th, 1880, Disraeli wrote to the 6th Duke asking for his stepmother's Christian names at length, and on the 23rd of April, she was created Baroness Bolsover. So it seems like Douglas Hurd and Edward Young may be correct, and that this was why Disraeli was double-checking the details of her name. Indeed, Disraeli did follow through with his promise to demonstrate gratitude to the family, which had given him so much. The 6th Duke of Portland visited Hughenden once again in the summer of 1880, and in his memoirs he recalled, "On my departure from Hughenden, Disraeli said, 'I am so glad to have seen you again, and now that I have held forth the hand of hospitality to you, it would give me great pleasure if you would do the same for me, for I am very anxious to visit Welbeck, the home of my dear friend George Bentinck, where he died so suddenly, causing so much grief, not only to me, but to the whole country as well.' In due course, I invited him to Welbeck for Easter week, where we were looking forward with great interest to his visit. Unfortunately, he fell ill a fortnight before he was due to arrive at Welbeck. One of his private secretaries wrote on the 7th of April to say it would not be in his power to fulfil the engagement. On the 19th of April, the 6th Duke received a telegram to say that Disraeli had died at 4:30 in the morning. While Disraeli never visited Welbeck, it is clear that the ancestral home of the Portland family held a special kind of significance to him. Up until the end of his life, Disraeli was keen to thank the family for their assistance and to deepen his close association with them. He certainly won over the 6th Duke of Portland, who reflected that his manner was particularly kind and courteous, before adding that Lord Beaconsfield's debt to the Bentinck family was larger than may appear. Disraeli, and indeed the Portland family, knew that his debt extended beyond the thousands of pounds he had borrowed. He owed his respectability to the family. It was due to first Lord George Bentinck and then his brothers that Disraeli was seen as a credible leader of first the protectionist wing and then the entire Tory party. Another quote attributed to Disraeli goes as follows: "What appear to be calamities are often the sources of fortune." Here, he seems to be suggesting that his earlier errors in playing the stock market and failing in the newspaper business helped him on the way to his later success. However, I think the more relevant quote is the one I began this talk with. "The secret of success in life is for a man to be ready for his opportunity." I hope that this talk has demonstrated how, for Disraeli, his window of opportunity came when he met and befriended the Portland family. Thank you very much. If you have any questions, please do feel free to post them in the chat and I will try my best to answer them. And if you have any questions that you think of after the end of this talk, We will be uploading this talk, like all our previous talks, which you can find on YouTube. So if you do think of anything, you are welcome to comment beneath the YouTube video, and we will try and answer those questions as well. We do have an upcoming talk in a month's time on the 25th of November. I will be discussing Christmas traditions on the Welbeck estate. So you can join us then for a very Cavendish Christmas, and we'll also be launching some new talks in the new year as well. So thank you very much for your time today, and I hope you enjoyed it. Oh, thank you very much.